Lake Champlain broke up late that year. Most Aprils, the ice was gone by the second week, gone quietly. The way ice preferred to go in Vermont, in pieces, drifting south toward the Narrows and dissolving into the cold green water without announcement. But that April had been cold through March and warm too fast after. And the ice had done what ice did when the temperature played games with it. It had fractured from the inside, locking itself into a surface that looked solid from shore and was anything but. Olivier Bastien had been watching it for 3 days. He was a lieutenant with Burlington Fire Station 6, 12 years on the department, 4 of those as the unit's senior ice rescue technician. He knew what bad ice looked like, the gray discoloration where air had worked into the crystal structure, the hairline fracture patterns that ran ahead of the thaw front, the way the surface seemed to breathe when the temperature differential was wrong. He'd pulled 7 people off this lake in his career. He had the specific relationship with Lake Champlain that comes from repeated proximity to what it could do. He was running the morning briefing when the call came in. A hiker, male, 50s, went out on the ice at the north end of the lake near the Colchester Causeway, apparently to photograph the breakup, apparently without understanding the distinction between watching ice break up and standing on ice that was breaking up. His wife had called from shore when she heard the first crack. He'd made it to a pressure ridge about 60 meters out before the panel he was standing on separated from the main sheet. Floating. Mobile, as far as she could tell. Alive, 60 meters of compromised ice between him and shore. Ren Ishida is already staged at the causeway, dispatch said through the radio. Wilderness paramedic, he came in with the Colchester Swift Response Unit. He's asking about ice conditions on the north panel. Olivier was already in his dry suit. Tell him not to move until I get there. I need to read the ice before anyone goes out. He drove north with the particular focus of someone who had learned, through experience, that the 12 minutes between a call and arrival were not wasted time. They were the time in which you built your plan, so that when you arrived, the plan was already in place and all you needed was the last piece of information to confirm it. The last piece of information was the ice, and, it turned out, the man standing at its edge. Ren Ishida was exactly where dispatch said he'd be, at the north end of the causeway, at the point where the ice met the riprap, looking out at the lake with the focused stillness of someone taking a reading. Japanese-American, early 30s, compact and composed in the way of a man whose job happened in places where composure was not optional. He had a technical rescue pack at his feet and a throw bag in his left hand, and he was looking at the ice the way Olivier looked at ice, not at the surface, through it. Reading the fracture lines, reading the color, he turned when he heard Olivier's truck. Bastien. His voice was even. No hello, no preamble, just the acknowledgement, and then, the north panel separated about 20 minutes ago. He's on a floe approximately 60 meters out, northeast of the number 4 buoy marker. The floe is maybe 4 meters across. It's stable for now, but the drift current is pulling it southeast. How fast? Slow, maybe a meter every 5 minutes. He looked back at the lake. If the drift accelerates when the south panel goes, which I think it will, the fracture line on the south side is already propagating. He'll lose his stable. Surface inside 40 minutes. Olivier stood beside him and looked at the ice. He could see the hiker, a small figure on a white square, genuinely small at 60 meters, sitting down, which was smart, weight distributed. Alive. Watching the shore the way people watch the shore when they needed the shore to come to them. He read the ice between them. The path was not nothing. There was a fracture channel running roughly east-west about 20 meters out. Open water, maybe a meter wide, which meant any approach on foot would require crossing it. The near panel looked workable in the northwest section, where the gray ice was thicker by color. The middle section was the problem, a zone of broken pancake ice that would take weight, but not necessarily in predictable sequence. I'll need a second set of eyes on the middle section, Olivier said. Someone on the shore end of the safety line who can read the panels as I move through them and call movement. Ren was quiet for exactly 1 beat. I can do that. You've done ice work? 2 winters in the Upper Peninsula. Medical response for an ice fishing community. He met Olivier's eyes. I know what moving ice sounds like. Olivier held his gaze for a moment. He had a protocol about going out alone. He never did. Full stop. Not on compromised ice. Not at any distance. The question was not whether he needed someone. The question was whether this particular someone could do the specific thing he needed. He asked it directly. If a panel starts to go while I'm on the middle section, I need you to call the direction of movement before it completes. Not after, before. The sound precedes the movement by about 2 seconds on lake ice this thickness, Ren said. I'll be listening. It was the specificity of it. Not I'll watch carefully, not I'll do my best. The precise technical fact delivered without decoration, from someone who had learned it in a place cold enough to matter. Okay, Olivier said. Let's talk about the crossing. They spent 7 minutes on the bank going over the route. Ren held the ice chart, Olivier's hand-drawn field assessment, done in the truck on the way up, and Olivier walked him through every decision point. The northwest entry, the fracture channel crossing on the throwbag bridge, the middle section in 3 stages. At each stage, what Ren was listening for, what he'd call, what Olivier would do when he heard it. Ren asked 4 questions. All 4 were the right questions, the kind that identified the gaps in a plan rather than confirming what was already known. Olivier answered them and revised one element of the route based on the 3rd question, which identified a risk he'd weighted too low. He didn't say anything about revising it. He just revised it. That was enough. One more thing, Ren said as Olivier was checking his rescue sled harness. The hiker. When I called out to him 20 minutes ago, he responded well. Alert, oriented, no signs of hypothermia yet. But the floe has maybe 6 inches of freeboard. If spray starts coming over the edge, his window changes. I know. Olivier looked at him. Talk to him while I cross. Keep him calm and upright and watching me. If he stands up, I'll tell him not to. Ren paused. I'm a paramedic. I know how to talk to someone who's scared. I know you do, Olivier said. He hadn't meant it to come out the way it did. Direct, certain, without qualification. He'd meant it as an acknowledgement, not a statement. But it landed in the space between them with more weight than he'd put into it. And he saw something shift in Ren's expression. Brief, contained. The kind of shift that happens when a person is used to having to establish their credentials, and someone skips the establishment. Olivier turned and looked at the lake. I'm going out, he said. The first 20 meters were solid. Olivier moved in the flat-footed shuffle of an ice technician. Weight spread wide, poles extended, reading the surface through his boots the way a doctor reads a pulse. The northwest panel held exactly as the color had told him it would. The fracture channel came up at 22 meters, and he threw the bridge line across, tested it, crossed low and fast with the rescue sled behind him. On shore, Ren's voice came through the radio, steady and specific. Panel to your left is shifting northeast. Nothing critical. 10-degree rotation. Copy. Hiker is standing. I've told him to sit. He's sitting. Good. The middle section was exactly what it had looked like from shore. A jigsaw of pancake ice. Each piece moving independently, each piece carrying just enough weight to be worth stepping on and not enough to be fully trusted. Olivier had crossed sections like this before. The secret was not speed and not hesitation, but a specific kind of rhythm. Weight committed, not held back. Because the thing that broke ice panels was the wavering. The half-step, the moment of second-guessing that left your weight in the wrong place at the wrong time. He was 8 meters into the middle section when Ren said, 2 o'clock. Subsurface fracture running ahead of your next step. Go left. Olivier went left. He heard the crack half a second later. The panel he'd been about to step on dropping 3 inches and sitting wrong. Copy, he said. His voice was level. His heart rate was not. But that was what dry suits were for, and helmets. And 12 years of knowing that your heart rate was allowed to do whatever it needed to, as long as your feet kept moving correctly. He crossed the middle section in 4 minutes. The hiker, his name was Walt. It turned out, a retired schoolteacher from Shelburne who had made a decision he deeply regretted, was on the floe looking at Olivier with the expression of a man who had spent 40 minutes reconsidering every choice he'd ever made. Okay, Olivier said, kneeling to match his eye level. You're okay. I'm Olivier, Burlington Fire. Can you tell me if anything hurts? My pride, Walt said. We'll deal with that on shore. He was already assessing. Skin color, extremity warmth, the specific quality of Walt's alertness. No hypothermia signs he could see, which matched Ren's red from 20 minutes ago. I'm going to get you on this sled. You're going to lie flat and keep your arms at your sides. I'll do the rest. How's the ice? It's fine, Olivier said, which was not technically true but was true enough for the purpose of keeping Walt calm and cooperative, which was what the situation required. "You're going to be home for lunch," Walt looked at him. "Is that real?" "It's real," Olivier held his gaze. "You have my word." Walt lay down on the sled. The crossing back was slower. Towing the sled changed the weight distribution on every panel, and the drift had moved the fracture channel 6 inches east of where he'd bridged it, which meant recalculating the exit line on the fly. Olivier was halfway through the middle section recalculating when Ren's voice came through again. "The south panel is going." Olivier stopped. "How fast?" "Fast. The main fracture line just opened. I can see open water from here, maybe 30 meters south of your position. The drift current is going to accelerate. You've got maybe 4 minutes before your exit path changes." 4 minutes. He was 40 meters from shore with a sled and a retired schoolteacher, and a jigsaw of pancake ice between them. "New exit line," Ren said. "Go northwest, 15 degrees off your current heading. There's a solid panel running to the shore edge. I can see the color from here. It's gray-blue. It'll hold. It adds 8 meters, but the current won't affect it." Olivier looked northwest. He couldn't see what Ren was seeing from shore. The angle was wrong. The light was wrong. But he could hear what Ren was describing, and he knew what gray-blue ice meant, and he trusted the color red. He went northwest. The panel held. He covered the 8 extra meters. The shore edge came up under his boots with the particular solidity of ground that had not been doing anything complicated, just sitting there being ground, and the relief of it moved through him the way it always did. Not dramatically, just as a fact. The way breathing moved through you after you'd been holding it. Ren was there. He was at the waterline, throw bag in hand, and he reached out and took the bow of the sled the moment it was in range and pulled. And Walt came up onto the riprap, and Ren crouched over him immediately with the specific, efficient focus of a paramedic in the first 30 seconds of a patient contact. Airway, breathing, circulation, the assessment that didn't wait for introductions. Olivier stood on the shore. He was wet across the chest from where a panel had shifted and sent a wave over his dry suit collar. He was cold in the specific way of someone who had been performing fine motor tasks in near-freezing conditions for the better part of an hour. There wasn't a word for it exactly, the particular state of a body after a thing like that. Not tired, not relieved. Something between the two that didn't have its own name. He watched Ren work, the competence of it, not showy, not performative. The clean, unself-conscious competence of someone who had done this long enough that the doing of it was simply what they looked like. The way he talked to Walt while he worked, low and even, keeping the man's attention on his voice while his hands were elsewhere. The way he called out his findings to Olivier without looking up, core temp, reflexes, skin, the professional shorthand of someone who understood that 2 people working the same patient needed shared information. Not a performance. At some point during this, Ren looked up. Their eyes met across Walt's prone form, just for a second. Just the brief acknowledgement that passed between people when the acute phase of something has turned a corner, and they both know it. Not a celebration, something quieter. The thing that passed between people when they'd been in a difficult place together and had come out on the same side. Ren looked back at his patient. Olivier looked at the lake. The ambulance took Walt at 11:22. He shook Olivier's hand before they loaded him, which Olivier had not expected, and said something about having a story to tell, which was true. He thanked Ren twice. Ren said you're welcome both times with the same economy he applied to everything. When the ambulance left, the causeway was quiet. The response units packed up and went. The Colchester Swift unit, Olivier's crew. The 2 Chittenden County Sheriff's deputies who'd been on scene for the last hour mostly watching. It had that post-emergency emptiness that Olivier recognized. The place still smelling like the thing that had happened, the air still carrying the charge of it, but the people gone and the problem solved, and the site slowly returning to itself. He was breaking down his equipment at the truck when he heard Ren's boots on the riprap behind him. Your collar, Ren said. Olivier reached up. His dry suit collar had folded in when the wave hit. He'd felt it happen and not had time to fix it, and a band of cold water had worked its way down his neck for the last 40 minutes without him attending to it. He'd been aware of it the way he was aware of a lot of things during a rescue, filed, noted, not addressed. I'm fine, he said. I know. Ren was already at his kit. You've been wet at the neck for 40 minutes in 40-degree air. Your core temp is still fine. I could see it in your hands on the ice. But the skin is going to be angry. He held up a heat pack and a small towel without making it a question. Olivier turned. Ren applied the heat pack to the back of his neck with the same practical directness he'd applied to everything else that morning. Standing close, necessarily close, the work required it, and quiet. The heat was immediate and specifically good, the way warmth was good when you hadn't realized how cold you'd been until the warmth arrived. The south panel red, Olivier said. The northwest exit. How did you see it from shore? The color differential. Gray-blue is denser ice. It reads darker at low angle because it reflects less. Ren's hands were steady. You couldn't see it from your position because you were looking at it straight on. I was looking at the angle. You saved 8 minutes. Maybe. You might have found it. I might have. Olivier was quiet for a moment. I might not have. Ren didn't say anything to that. He removed the heat pack, checked the skin with a brief clinical touch, and stepped back. It's fine. Just keep it warm. Olivier turned around. They were close. The working distance had become standing distance, and neither of them had adjusted for it. Ren was looking at him with that steady reading quality his eyes always had. Not guarded, just careful. The kind of careful that was not the same as closed. He had the same quality Olivier had noticed from the first moment. The composed face, the words that were exactly what they needed to be and no more. But it was different now, after the ice, after the 4 minutes in the south panel and the northwest exit. The composure was the same. Something underneath it had come into view. You revised the route, Ren said, after the third question. You didn't say anything, you just changed it. You found a gap. Most people would have defended the original plan. Most people would be wrong. Olivier held his gaze. I'd rather be right and cold than defended and wet. Something moved in Ren's expression. The hint of something that was not quite amusement and not quite surprise. The specific look of a person who has encountered an approach to their own work that is unfamiliar and finds it more welcome than expected. I've been doing wilderness response for 7 years, Ren said. I've worked with a lot of people who couldn't hear a correction without turning it into a negotiation. I've been on ice for 12 years, Olivier said. Ice doesn't negotiate. No, a beat. It doesn't. The lake was behind them, doing what the lake did in late April. Calving the last of its ice in slow, deliberate pieces, the breakup completing itself on its own schedule with the particular indifference of large bodies of water to the humans who built their lives at their margins. The light was low and northern, the thin, precise light of Vermont in the early weeks of real spring. Not warm yet. Not fully, but with the quality of warmth in it, the suggestion that the warmth was coming and meant to stay. There's a place on Church Street, Olivier said. Soup that takes the cold seriously. The kind of place where nobody will question why 2 people who smell like lake ice walked in on a Tuesday morning. Ren looked at him, the same careful look, taking its time. I have to file the medical report. Walt's family will want documentation. How long? Half an hour if I do it right. He paused. 45 if I'm honest about the south panel situation. Be honest, Olivier said. Your ice reads were accurate. Put them in. Ren held his gaze for a moment. Something in him, the composure still there, the same controlled quality it always had, shifted just slightly. Not open exactly, but less like a surface that was finished and more like one that was still deciding. You came back across the middle section in 4 minutes with a sled, he said. It wasn't a question. It wasn't exactly a compliment either. It was an observation, the kind that carried weight precisely because it wasn't decorated. You gave me a clean line. Olivier said, you had to trust it. I trusted it. He looked at Ren. I'd trust it again. The space between them held that for a moment. Lake Champlain was behind them. Gray-green and wide, the last ice moving slowly south in the drift current, catching the morning light in pieces and giving it back changed. In a week it would all be gone. The lake would be itself again, the version Olivier had known in summer and fall, deep and navigable and ordinary. But right now it was still in between. Still the dangerous version. Still the version that required attention. Ren looked at the lake. I've been in Burlington 8 months, he said. I took the Colchester position because the mountains here are... He paused, searching for the word. Serious. The terrain asks things. It does. I didn't know anyone. I just knew the work. He looked at his hands. The hands that had read Walt's pulse and called the south panel and applied a heat pack with the same unvarying competence for all three. It's been enough, mostly. The work. Olivier looked at him. He understood that. He understood it specifically, not as a sentiment but as a state of being. The way the work could fill a life to the waterline and feel like enough until the moment you worked with someone who made you aware of the waterline. Church Street, he said. Half an hour. Ren looked at him. That final taking stock look. The look that didn't assume anything and didn't perform anything, just looked. Church Street, he said. He turned to his truck. Olivier turned to his equipment. The lake ran on behind them, cold and changing, doing the slow, necessary work of becoming something else. Olivier loaded the last of his gear. He thought about the northwest panel. Gray-blue. Dense. The color Ren had read from shore that he couldn't see from where he was standing. The route that had gotten them home. The 8 meters that hadn't been in the original plan, he thought. Some things you only find from the right angle. And sometimes the right angle is standing on shore, watching someone else cross and knowing which way to call them.